On a Wednesday night in March 2006, a congregation in Selmer, Tennessee awaited a minister who was never tardy. 10 minutes elapsed, then 30 minutes, then another hour. Eventually, the church elders went to his home to discover what was wrong. They discovered Matthew Winkler dead across his bedroom floor, shot through the back. His wife and 3 young daughters had vanished, and the search launched that evening became, for a day and a half, a search for victims. Selmer lies in the southwestern corner of Tennessee, about 80 miles east of Memphis, the sort of town where an absent preacher is noticed within the hour. The 4th Street Church of Christ formed much of the town's foundation, and Matthew Winkler, 31, served as its pulpit minister. When the men arriving to check on him discovered his body, the investigation started, in the words of the detective who examined the scene, as a puzzle. Mary Winkler and the couple's 3 daughters, 8-year-old Patricia, 6-year-old Mary Alice, known as Allie, and 1-year-old Brianna had completely disappeared, and so had the family's minivan. The bedroom telephone, detectives observed, remained unplugged on the floor beside the body. None of the children's bedrooms showed any disturbance. Nothing had been scattered or damaged. Everything throughout the house appeared normal, and the children had simply vanished. An Amber Alert was issued across the country. At that moment, this remained the story of a family facing danger. It would not remain that way. To appreciate the significance this death carried, you have to understand what the Winkler name represented. Matthew Brian Winkler entered the world in November 1974 into a family where preaching was practically a birthright. His father, Dan, served as a minister. His grandfather, Wendell Winkler, was a nationally recognized evangelist who preached for over half a century. By the family's own description, Matthew became a 4th-generation preacher, raised throughout Tennessee and Alabama within the traditions of the Church of Christ. He was tall, athletic, an on-time high school football player, and according to those who filled his pews, captivating behind the pulpit. People insisted there was no chance of falling asleep during any of his sermons. When his new congregation in Selmer described what they had sought in a minister, the words sounded almost reverential. "He brought everyone together," one member said. "He was," she said, "precisely what they needed." He met Mary Carol Freeland at Freed-Hardeman University, a Church of Christ school in Henderson, Tennessee. They married during 1996. He was 21, she was 22. Mary left college to help finance Matthew's education. Those familiar with her recalled she was outgoing during her younger years. Her childhood had been every bit as strict and church-focused as Matthew's, and their early marriage followed that same pattern, founded upon the belief shared throughout their church that the husband leads the household. Their oldest daughter, Patricia, arrived in 1997, named after a sister Mary had buried as a child. Allie arrived in 1999, and Brianna during early 2005. As Matthew's reputation grew, youth minister in McMinnville, then senior minister in Selmer, the family appeared from the outside like a picture of everything their community admired. That outward appearance is exactly what this case would spend a year dismantling. The closing week of Matthew Winkler's life seemed, looking back, completely ordinary. On Sunday, March 19th, he delivered a sermon that was warmly received. On Tuesday, March 21st, Mary served as a substitute teacher. That night, Matthew borrowed a movie for their daughters. These were the quiet, everyday moments that shaped a family's routine and slipped by unnoticed until they became the final ones of their kind. What the church elders discovered the following evening transformed a missing persons concern into a homicide. Matthew had been shot one time in the back with a 12-gauge shotgun while lying in bed. The blast sent dozens of pellets through his body. Reports placed the total at 77, shattering his spine and injuring internal organs. He had either rolled or fallen from the bed onto the floor. He was not, investigators eventually concluded, killed immediately. One detail discovered at the scene would haunt the entire case. The bedroom telephone rested several feet from Matthew's body, disconnected from its cord. To investigators, the suggestion was chilling that the phone had been unplugged so an injured man could not reach help. The state medical examiner would state only that Matthew required a limited amount of time to die. Nobody inside the house used the phone to request assistance, and that one detail would be debated by both sides throughout the remainder of the case. While Selmer processed the news, the search expanded beyond state borders. It concluded the next day in Orange Beach, Alabama, a Gulf Coast resort community hundreds of miles from home. A vigilant officer noticed the family's minivan. Police, continuing to treat this as a possible kidnapping, carried out what they described as a felony traffic stop, instructing the driver to exit, hands raised, then walk backward toward them. The driver was Mary Winkler. The 3 girls were safe. The officers who conducted the stop were surprised by how calm she appeared. One later said she seemed almost to have expected them, but she exited without speaking, wearing a vacant expression across her face. When they searched the van, they discovered a shotgun in the rear. At that instant, the woman they had considered a possible victim became the suspect in her husband's death. The girls were placed into child services care. Mary was handcuffed, advised of her rights, and transported to the station. What had occurred during the 2 days between the shooting and the stop would become, in Mary's account, an act of motherhood. She had brought her daughters to the beach. According to investigators repeating her words, she said she knew her time with them was limited, and she wanted to give them joyful days before the difficult ones arrived. Several hours following the arrest, a Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agent named Stan Stablers met with Mary for an interview lasting slightly more than an hour and recorded on audio tape. The agent later recalled he was surprised by her composure, that she did not appear traumatized by everything that had occurred. On that recording, Mary initially defended her husband's memory, even while she started describing the morning he died. She said she had endured abuse like a mouse for years, and then, in the phrase that would remain with her everywhere, that her ugly came out. I was upset at him because he'd really been on me lately, criticizing me for things, the way I walk, the way I eat, everything. It was just building up to this point. I was just tired of it. I guess I got to a point and snapped. According to the agent's account, Mary admitted shooting Matthew once. She said she expected the gun would recoil harder than it did, that she heard a loud blast, and that he rolled out of the bed onto the floor. She was transported back to Selmer that Friday, signed a written statement, and was formally charged. She transferred temporary custody of her daughters to Matthew's parents, Dan and Diane Winkler. A grand jury would charge her with first-degree murder. Whether what she provided that evening was a confession to a deliberate killing or the confused account of a woman experiencing crisis would become the central battle of the trial. Both sides would replay that same tape and hear 2 completely different things within it. The day after charges were filed, Mary received an unexpected visitor inside her jail cell, a Mississippi defense attorney named Steve Faries. He enlisted a well-known Memphis lawyer, Leslie Ballin. By Ballin's own account, when he learned the case would be handled without charge, he believed his phone had disconnected. Faries told him it was the proper thing to do. The entire defense team would represent Mary free of charge throughout the criminal case. Opposing them stood Michael Donahoe, at 36, the youngest district attorney in state history. Elected only months earlier, he assigned the courtroom duties to his most experienced assistant, Walt Freeland. Mary posted bond, set at $750,000 during August 2006, and was released to stay with a Church of Christ family in McMinnville until trial. The prosecution believed it possessed a strong case for premeditation. The defense believed it possessed something the prosecution could never see, the inside of a marriage. When the trial began in April 2007, the prosecution presented a motive as old as money. During the months before Matthew's death, the Winklers' finances had unraveled into something resembling chaos, and the state argued that Mary stood at its center. It started, prosecutors claimed, in late 2005 when a check worth thousands of dollars arrived at the financially struggling Winkler household. It was part of a fraudulent lottery operation, a scam often referred to as the Nigerian scam. Rather than throwing it away, Mary deposited it and used the funds. Then the check bounced. To conceal the deficit, the state argued, she went even further. She redirected the family's mail to a post office box, established an out-of-town account, and soon began moving worthless checks among several banks faster than they could respond. The offense is known as check kiting, and the checks, the state stressed, carried Mary's signature, not Matthew's. During the final days before the shooting, prosecutors argued, the pressure intensified. Mary completed a flurry of transfers between accounts, and on the day she served as a substitute teacher, a coworker observed her pacing the classroom while talking on the phone, distressed. The state's version claimed the bank was closing in, insisting she appear to explain the bounced checks and bring her husband. The deadline, prosecutors argued, was March 22nd. To Donovan, the reasoning was straightforward. Confronted with exposure before the husband whose reputation as a Church of Christ minister relied upon appearances, Mary selected murder instead of divorce. The state guided the jury through the disconnected telephone. a firearms expert who testified the shotgun functioned properly and could not discharge without pulling the trigger, and the complete hour and 5-minute tape. Then it concluded its case with the witness nobody would ever forget. Prosecutors called the Winklers' oldest daughter Patricia, then 9 years old. The judge ordered every courtroom camera switched off. She approached the witness stand wearing a black and white polka dot dress, composed beyond her years, until the prosecutor asked her birthday, and she broke down. She had been one room away the morning her father died. The girl, wearing a black and white polka dot dress, said she and her sisters had been awakened by a big boom or something on the morning of the killing. She said she quietly entered her parents' bedroom and discovered her father lying on the floor, moaning. Prosecutor Freeland asked whether Matthew had been a good father, and the child quietly answered, "Yes, sir." Asked whether he'd ever been cruel toward her mother, she replied, "No, sir." It was testimony that struck directly against the argument the defense was preparing to present. Then, during questioning by her mother's own attorney, the 9-year-old was asked why, after one visit, she'd stopped seeing Mary following her release from jail. She said it was because she no longer wanted to. Following a lengthy pause, she added that she still loved her before dissolving into tears. Mary cried. Several jurors cried. The defense attorney stepped toward the witness stand to comfort the child and asked nothing further. The conflict at the center of the case now had a face, a daughter who loved her mother, who had witnessed no abuse, and who could not explain why she no longer wished to see her. The defense began with one central idea that the marriage everyone admired concealed a hidden reality. Mary Winkler seemed to have a marriage made in heaven. Behind closed doors, they argued, it was a living hell. What came next was the defense's version, much of it taken from Mary's own statements to a psychologist, and later from Mary herself. Portions were supported by witnesses. Much of it was not, and the prosecution challenged it forcefully. The jury was asked to evaluate claims that by their nature had mostly unfolded where nobody else could witness them. The defense presented witnesses to undermine Matthew's public image. Mary's sister testified that he controlled Mary's actions and separated her from her family, that her once cheerful sister had become withdrawn and difficult to reach. A highway patrol officer described Matthew becoming enraged over a barking dog, yelling and gesturing wildly with his arms. Another report stated Matthew had repeatedly threatened to shoot a neighboring family's dog. A church member testified she had once seen Mary with a black eye and recalled watching her become silent and withdraw the moment Matthew walked into a room. None of this constituted physical evidence of abuse, and the prosecution would emphasize during closing arguments that no medical records documented it. Mary, the defense responded, had been far too ashamed to tell anyone. The defense's explanation for what occurred that morning relied heavily upon a forensic psychologist, Dr. Lynn Zager. She testified that Mary's struggles started at 13 after her younger sister died, and her deeply religious family directed her away from receiving help from a school counselor. The beginning, Zager explained, of severe and untreated mental health conditions, including post-traumatic stress disorder. That disorder, the psychologist testified, made Mary especially vulnerable and likely during moments of crisis to experience dissociative episodes, a condition she described as stepping outside herself, as though trapped inside a fog. In her professional opinion, Mary had not been capable that morning of forming the intent required to commit a crime. What ultimately pushed Mary into that fog, the defense argued, was something that occurred during the early hours of March 22nd. According to Mary's account, conveyed through Zager and later from the witness stand, the baby was crying and Matthew attempted to quiet her by covering both her nose and mouth, something Mary said he had previously done with the older girls as infants. Afterward, Zager testified, Mary said she walked into the kitchen to prepare coffee, just as on any ordinary day. The prosecution would immediately focus on that statement. A woman able to recall making coffee, they argued, was not someone wandering through a fog. Then, Mary Winkler testified in her own defense and the trial shifted. Speaking in a gentle Southern voice, she portrayed a marriage where, she said, abuse started within months. Being shoved down, beaten with a belt, kicked. She testified that Matthew threatened her using a shotgun, telling her, she said, that if she ever answered back, he would cut her into a million pieces. She said he had denied her a divorce, which within their church carried enormous stigma and could have destroyed his career. Then came the moment everyone inside the courtroom would remember. At her attorney's request, Mary opened a paper bag and removed a platform high heel and a wig. She testified that Matthew had purchased them, that he had wanted her to wear them, and when questioned further, that it was for sex. The defense told the jury that shoes like those appeared in pornography discovered on Matthew's computer, and Mary testified he had pressured her into acts she viewed as unnatural and humiliating. For a conservative Church of Christ audience, the accusations against a beloved minister landed with overwhelming force. There was, according to multiple accounts, an audible gasp. Regarding the central question, whether she intended to kill him, Mary's response was that she could not remember. She said she had only wanted to speak with him, to make him stop being so cruel. She did not remember retrieving the gun, she testified, and did not remember pulling the trigger. She remembered hearing a sound, a boom, before running away. Asked directly whether she had deliberately killed her husband, she answered no. Asked whether she still loved him, despite everything she had described, she answered yes. The prosecution remained unconvinced, and during cross-examination focused on the selective limits of Mary's memory. The assistant district attorney emphasized that she could remember Matthew covering the baby's face, and remember going to prepare coffee, but not the event between them, not how the shotgun discharged into her husband's back. The state reminded jurors there was no medical documentation supporting the abuse she described, that the daughter living inside the home had witnessed none, and that her testimony in court differed from what she initially told investigators. The claim of an accidental shooting, prosecutors argued, was absurd. A woman had fired a shotgun into a sleeping man's back, then driven away while he was dying. The defense, during closing arguments, admitted only the smallest possible point. The lead attorney told the jury the state had failed to establish intent to kill, and, pushed by his own reasoning toward what she might have been guilty of, acknowledged that perhaps she had acted negligently. He then delivered the statement that summarized his entire theory of the case, that if you looked up spousal abuse in the dictionary, you would find Mary Winkler's picture staring back at you. Well, I think the defense has done a great job of creating this sympathetic impression of their client, which is exactly what they're supposed to do, and getting her to be remorseful at an early stage of the proceedings, but they are glossing over a lot of information in this case. I mean, we're all assuming that Mary Winkler is this wonderful person. However, did she get the gun from the closet? Did she load the gun? What was the last thing that her husband said to her before she shot him? We're glossing over a lot of premeditation here and jumping to the conclusion that Mary Winkler is a very sympathetic character, when in fact, she could be a cold-blooded killer. What did she do after the shooting? Did she call the police? Was the car loaded and ready to go? I think we're making a leap of faith here to say that Mary Winkler is this sympathetic, wonderful person. She shot somebody in the back. The jury of 10 women and 2 men received 5 possible verdicts, ranging from first-degree murder, which carried life, down to criminally negligent homicide, which could mean as little as a year. What the jurors never learned was that a conviction for first- or second-degree murder would permanently remove Mary's legal rights to her daughters. They deliberated for approximately 8 hours. On April 19, 2007, they returned with a verdict positioned midway among their 5 options. Voluntary manslaughter. There were some who believed she shouldn't receive any punishment. They were prepared to let her walk. They believed he deserved what happened to him. Then you had others who felt, yes, she was abused, but she still took a life, and she should face some consequence for it. We were under tremendous stress during that period because we couldn't figure out how to resolve it. So, things became heated inside the jury room? Very much so. I heard you became frustrated because one juror wouldn't even acknowledge that she pulled the trigger. Yes, refused to accept it. And I looked at her and said, what? Would this jury have allowed Mary to leave free? Some of them would have. They believed she had already endured prison through the life she lived, that her actions were justified, and that she deserved her freedom. That's why you compromised and agreed on the lesser charge. Yes, because I didn't want her to walk. According to her attorney, Mary's first question after hearing the verdict was whether it meant she could regain custody of her children. Jurors later explained they could not reach agreement over whether the shotgun might have discharged accidentally, but they had been influenced by the psychologist's testimony and by the allegations of sexual coercion. The sentence imposed that June shocked the country. Mary received a 3-year sentence, but the judge ordered her to serve only 210 days, with credit for time already served, and as many as 60 of the remaining days in a mental health facility. Ultimately, beyond the time she had already served, she would spend about 2 months receiving psychiatric treatment and only a handful of days in jail. What came after the trial was not closure, but another, quieter battle over 3 young girls. Matthew's parents, Dan and Diane Winkler, who had cared for the daughters since the arrest, sought to terminate Mary's parental rights, adopt them, and filed a multi-million-dollar wrongful death lawsuit against her. Tennessee law permits a court to terminate the rights of a parent convicted of the intentional and wrongful death of the child's other parent. But the manslaughter verdict and the abuse the jury had apparently accepted complicated that course. Mary received supervised visitation, then lost those rights on appeal before having them restored. The dispute eventually reached the Tennessee Supreme Court, which denied the grandparents' attempt to prevent her visits. The legal battle continued for 2 years. Then, in August 2008, both parties reached a settlement, and Mary regained custody of her daughters. A woman convicted of fatally shooting her minister husband has regained custody of her children. 34-year-old Mary Winkler will once again have the right to care for her 3 daughters, now ages 3, 9, and 11. Winkler was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter last year in the 2006 homicide. During the trial, Winkler testified she had endured years of physical and emotional abuse from her husband, 31-year-old Matthew Winkler. The grandparents had attempted to prevent Winkler from visiting her children. The case ultimately reached the Tennessee Supreme Court, which denied their request. By any standard, it was an extraordinary result. A woman who had killed the father of her children was raising those same children again within 2 years. The grandparents kept visitation rights. 2 families joined through marriage and shattered by death now had to discover a way to share the children caught between them. During the years that followed, Mary Winkler attempted to live quietly. She remained in Tennessee, raised her daughters, and was eventually diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. In one uncommon interview, she spoke not about the killing, but about wanting her daughters judged for who they were instead of what their mother had done. Remarkably, she said that during a medical crisis, Matthew's parents, the very people who had battled her in court over the children, stepped forward to care for the girls. What this case ultimately never delivered was certainty. The prosecutor maintained until the end that the evidence indicated premeditation, a woman trapped by her own financial crimes who killed to protect the secret. The defense maintained, with equal conviction, that an abused woman had finally collapsed beneath years of cruelty no outsider had witnessed. Both versions cannot be completely true, and the only individual who knew every detail has never recounted it the same way twice. A 9-year-old testified she never witnessed her father harming her mother. A jury examined a wig and a high heel and found enough reasonable doubt to spare a woman from spending the remainder of her life behind bars. What remains is more difficult to define. A 31-year-old minister is dead, shot in the back inside the home where his daughters slept. 3 girls grew up after losing their father at the hands of their mother and were later returned to that same mother to be raised. Whatever the reality of that marriage may have been, it ended with one shotgun blast in the darkness, and everyone left behind has spent the years afterward living with a story that was never permitted to fully resolve. Some odors simply cannot be explained. A dense, nauseating stench that settles against the back of the throat. During the summer of 2008, it poured from the trunk of a deserted white Pontiac Sunfire sitting beneath the relentless Florida sun. Yet the real nightmare wasn't the unmistakable odor of human decomposition sealed within. It was the woman behind the wheel. A 22-year-old mother had been passing her evenings at nearby clubs and competing in bikini contests, while her 2-year-old daughter had remained missing for 31 days. She never bothered contacting the police, and she had no intention of doing so. The residence on Hopering Drive in Orlando, Florida, resembled the American dream finished in beige stucco. George and Cindy Anthony labored endlessly to preserve that perfect exterior. George, a retired law enforcement officer, had eased into a passive household role, often withdrawing from confrontation to keep the family's balance undisturbed. Cindy remained the unquestioned matriarch, fiercely devoted, highly mindful of neighborhood appearances, and used to exercising complete authority over her surroundings. Their daughter Casey stood at the center of their world, intelligent, magnetic, and remarkably perceptive. She discovered early how to manage her mother's controlling personality. She never resisted through shouting arguments or banging doors. She resisted through steady, quiet deception. By her teenage years, lying had become Casey's main survival strategy. It wasn't merely a method for escaping punishment. It had evolved into an all-encompassing way of life. She created a complex network of lies that her parents mostly decided to overlook. Her senior year of high school revealed the earliest and most obvious warning sign. Casey let her parents organize an elaborate graduation celebration, received presents from family members, and posed happily for photographs. In truth, she had quit attending school months earlier. She completely lacked the credits required for graduation. Once the school administration inevitably verified she would not be crossing the stage, the Anthony family's reaction established a dangerous psychological pattern. Rather than confronting the dysfunction, they buried the humiliation to preserve their reputation. Because the lies were accepted, the deception continued growing. Casey developed into an expert at compartmentalization, capable of staring her parents directly in the eyes while telling absolute fiction without altering her resting heart rate. During the spring of 2005, the family relationship became permanently broken. Casey started putting on weight. After being questioned by her mother, she provided several changing, senseless explanations. The deception continued through 7 agonizing months until Cindy finally confronted reality, discovering her 19-year-old daughter had reached the 3rd trimester of a concealed pregnancy. Casey declined to identify the father, supplying unclear accounts about a brief encounter. Investigators would eventually determine impossible to confirm. George withdrew even deeper into his personal routines, allowing the women to compete for control. For a household consumed by social status, an unmarried teenage pregnancy represented a catastrophe. Yet Cindy assumed command exactly as she always had. She arranged the baby shower, purchased the crib, and essentially readied herself to raise the baby alone. Kaylee Marie Anthony entered the world in August 2005. The newborn delivered a sincere wave of happiness throughout the home, yet she also permanently transformed the family's psychological structure. Cindy instantly took over as the child's primary caregiver. She controlled the child's routine, handled the finances, and supplied the security the infant needed. Beneath her mother's roof, Casey was reduced. She wasn't regarded as the matriarch. She was viewed as an irresponsible older sister. The baby became Cindy's second chance, an opportunity to raise a child correctly. Meanwhile, Casey watched her personal independence disappear. Externally, they presented the appearance of a supportive multi-generational family. Privately, the atmosphere felt suffocating. Casey remained completely reliant upon her parents for housing, childcare, and financial support. Still, she bitterly resented the restrictions accompanying that dependence. To make her escape possible, Casey started leaving the house for hours daily, insisting she had obtained rewarding employment as an event planner at Universal Studios. She carried home fabricated schedules and recounted detailed stories involving her coworkers. Cindy desperately longed to believe her daughter had finally embraced responsibility, so she overlooked the obvious contradictions. Foremost among them was the fact Casey never brought home a paycheck. As Kaylee developed into an inquisitive toddler, the conflict between a grandmother insisting upon responsibility and a mother yearning for an unburdened existence created an emotional pressure cooker. A boiling point was unavoidable. Each weekday morning, Casey awoke inside her childhood bedroom, wearing business casual clothing, and kissed her toddler goodbye. She collected her keys, stepped through the front door, and headed toward Universal Studios. Yet she had neither desk, identification badge, nor paycheck. Instead, she parked her white Pontiac inside the enormous employee parking lot, reclined the seat, and waited. She remained in the sweltering Florida heat for hours, playing games on her phone, napping, and carefully mapping out her upcoming moves. Whenever her mother called during her supposed shift, Casey answered quietly, insisting she was attending a mid-morning staff meeting. She created an elaborate corporate environment featuring demanding supervisors, irritating coworkers, and approaching promotions. It reflected a staggering, nearly sociopathic dedication to a fantasy. To grasp the full extent of the deception, it helps to examine the machinery behind the lie. She wasn't merely avoiding employment. She was deliberately creating an alternate reality. She falsified W-2 tax documents on her computer to demonstrate income to her parents. She invented business travel that conveniently matched out-of-town parties. Her friends believed she was a successful event coordinator, while her parents believed she was establishing a dependable career supporting her child. In truth, she was sinking into a self-created emptiness. The burden of sustaining several conflicting identities demanded remarkable composure. Whenever a friend requested to see her office, she accepted immediately, driving them to the Universal lot, escorting them toward the security checkpoint, then stopping only to claim she had forgotten her guest passes at the final possible moment. She never abandoned character. The act remained flawless. Once the sun disappeared, the corporate facade dissolved, revealing the identity she genuinely cherished. Orlando After Dark provided relief from the suffocating supervision of Hopering Drive. She regularly visited clubs like Fusion, surrounding herself with a fast-moving social scene of promoters, DJs, and bartenders. Within this neon-lit world, she was no longer an unemployed, confined mother residing inside her parents' guest room. She became the center of every party, energetic, unattached, and intensely self-reliant. She purchased rounds of shots, danced atop VIP stages, and dated men who knew almost nothing regarding her child. Kaylee usually remained home with her grandmother. During the uncommon occasions the toddler accompanied late-night apartment gatherings, she was placed asleep inside a dark rear room while the adults drank throughout the kitchen. Yet an active social lifestyle demanded considerable money, and an imaginary theme park job earned absolutely nothing. Her answer became systematic theft. She began modestly, slipping $20 bills from her father's wallet. When that became inadequate, her offenses intensified. She stole checks from her elderly grandmother, carefully falsifying the signature to empty the woman's nursing home accounts. She exhausted her mother's credit cards on alcohol and clothing. She borrowed substantial amounts from friends, inventing heartbreaking, emotional stories about frozen bank accounts and payroll mistakes to pressure them into surrendering their rent money. She was spending cash at an alarming pace, creating a careless paper trail of fraud. Still, her family, determined to prevent a public scandal, repeatedly concealed everything. Cindy would uncover a stolen check, yell at her daughter until the walls trembled, then quietly restore the missing funds to prevent police involvement. They remained trapped inside a poisonous, codependent relationship, the enabler and the parasite. By spring 2008, the emotional pressure cooker inside the home had reached a critical point. Kaylee was approaching her third birthday. Cindy's tolerance for her daughter's unpredictable hours and disappearing money had completely vanished. The grandmother essentially regarded the toddler as her own, openly criticizing Casey's parenting abilities before friends and relatives. Eventually, the greatest threat was delivered. Cindy vowed to seek legal custody. That court action would officially deprive the 22-year-old of the only thing still connecting her to an appearance of respectable adulthood. For Casey, surrendering custody wouldn't simply mean losing her child. It would bring complete public humiliation. It would reveal the enormous decaying foundation beneath her entire existence to the surrounding community. The walls surrounding her fabricated reality were rapidly closing inward. Friends demanded repayment for thousands of dollars they had loaned. Cindy demanded employment verification, threatening to personally drive to Universal Studios and confirm the work schedule. George silently watched the financial collapse of his household. The forged W-2 forms no longer satisfied the growing suspicion. The cornered daughter couldn't confess the truth without shattering her life, and she couldn't sustain the deception without constant, draining avoidance. The conflict between the controlling matriarch and the cornered daughter produced an intensely volatile environment where judgment and reason disappeared. The foundation of her double life was completely unsustainable, and the weight of that approaching disastrous collapse rested entirely upon the existence of a small, brown-eyed 2-year-old girl. The next afternoon on June 16th, the 22-year-old gathered her belongings, secured her daughter inside the car seat of the white Pontiac Sunfire, and drove away. She never returned that night. She failed to return the following day. The little girl was never seen alive again. What happened afterward was not a desperate search. There were no missing person flyers, no frantic calls to law enforcement, and no tears. Instead, the mother began a 31-day stretch of surreal, horrifying normalcy. Within hours of the point investigators believed the child drew her final breath, the mother visited a nearby video rental store. Surveillance footage showed her strolling through the aisles, casually browsing newly released movies. Her behavior appeared completely calm. Later that evening, she reached the apartment of her new boyfriend, a 21-year-old club promoter named Tony. She carried her belongings inside and effectively moved in. The apartment was an ordinary bachelor residence shared by several roommates and regularly crowded with visitors. When Tony and his friends noticed the toddler's sudden disappearance, they asked entirely reasonable questions. The mother never hesitated. She effortlessly introduced another story, claiming the child was spending several days at the beach with an exceptionally dependable babysitter. She even provided a name, Zenaida. The roommates had no reason to question her. She relaxed on their couch, drank beer, watched movies, and exhibited absolutely no indication of a woman who had recently experienced a devastating tragedy. By June 18th, the truth of the situation demanded practical attention. She briefly revisited her parents' neighborhood, carefully planning the trip when she knew they would be working. She knocked upon a neighbor's door and requested to borrow a shovel, explaining she needed to remove a stubborn bamboo root from the backyard. The neighbor handed her the tool. 1 hour later, she returned it. With the physical evidence supposedly handled, she completely immersed herself in Orlando's nightlife. The remarkable speed of her return to the club scene was astonishing. On June 20th, only 4 days after the toddler disappeared, she went to a party at Fusion nightclub. Photographs taken that evening captured her wearing a blue dress, drinking, laughing, and dancing atop a VIP platform. She participated in a hot body contest, posing before cameras beneath the neon lights. Her smile appeared broad and effortless. She was the center of the celebration, completely carefree. To maintain this lifestyle, she depended upon her familiar methods. She entered a friend's car, stole a checkbook, and systematically forged signatures at nearby retail stores. She purchased fresh clothes, alcohol, and groceries, financing a carefree summer while her daughter lay decomposing inside a swamp less than a quarter mile from her childhood home. Yet the physical reality of a decomposing human body cannot be ignored forever. Florida's summer is relentless. Temperatures regularly climbed into the high 90s. Inside the trunk of the white Sunfire, the natural processes of decomposition were progressing quickly. By the final days of June, the odor leaking throughout the vehicle's cabin had become overwhelming. On June 24th, she committed a reckless mistake. Desperate for fresh clothing, she drove the Sunfire back to Hopering Drive. Rather than opening the trunk where neighbors could easily see, she reversed the car tightly into the garage. Her father, George, unexpectedly happened to be home. As he entered the garage, the stench struck him like a physical impact. It was an odor he instantly recognized from his years in law enforcement. The unmistakable, sweet, nauseating scent of death. He confronted his daughter, panic filling his voice. She never panicked. She calmly delivered another lie, insisting a neighborhood cat or squirrel had climbed inside the engine compartment and died. She promised she would remove it. The former police officer, shaped by years of avoiding confrontation with the women inside his home, accepted the fabricated explanation and walked away. 3 days later, the vehicle became a burden she could no longer handle. On June 27th, the Sunfire ran completely out of gas. She pushed it into the parking lot of an Amscott Financial Services building only a few miles away. The interior reeked like a slaughterhouse. She collected her purse, locked the doors, and simply walked away, abandoning the vehicle beneath the blazing sun. A tow yard dispatcher eventually discovered it, placing a warning sticker across the windshield before transporting it to a secure lot. Without transportation, she depended upon her boyfriend and his roommates for rides. Her conduct became increasingly stranger. On July 2nd, 16 days after the disappearance began, she entered a nearby tattoo studio. She asked for a particular design tattooed onto her left shoulder. The artist spent an hour permanently marking her skin with the Italian phrase Bella Vita. It means beautiful life. She spoke pleasantly with the staff throughout the appointment, completely comfortable within her new reality. While the daughter embraced her beautiful life, the mother was steadily losing her grasp on sanity. Cindy had devoted 2 weeks to calling, texting, and leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. Every effort to see her granddaughter was answered with a clinically efficient lie. Whenever Cindy insisted upon a visit, her daughter replied by text that they were in Jacksonville on an unexpected business trip. When the grandmother offered to travel there, the daughter insisted the toddler was visiting a water park and shouldn't be interrupted. The explanations changed every day. The babysitter had taken the child to the beach. The babysitter had been involved in a minor car accident, and they were at the hospital. The child was sleeping. The child was eating. The child was fine. The overwhelming amount of deception necessary to sustain the standoff was enormous. She transmitted dozens of text messages from Tony's apartment, lying across his bed while composing elaborate stories to keep her mother away. Cindy's frustration transformed into instinctive maternal panic. She started locating her daughter's friends through MySpace, sending urgent messages asking whether anyone had seen the toddler. The friends, utterly bewildered, responded they believed the child was with her. The psychological disconnect was complete. By mid-July, the 31 days of silence were nearing their conclusion. The lies had exhausted every remaining option. The stolen checks were bouncing. The abandoned car remained inside a tow yard, releasing a horrifying odor, and the grandmother was aggressively searching for her. The collision between the fabricated reality and the bleak physical truth was approaching. George drove to the facility to recover the vehicle. The sweltering mid-July Florida heat shimmered above the asphalt. As soon as the attendant guided him toward the car, the harsh reality of the situation became impossible to dismiss. The employee remarked upon the overwhelming foul odor drifting from the trunk, suggesting some animal had died inside. George paid the charges and opened the doors. The smell was overwhelming, thick, sweet, and suffocating. It was an odor he recognized immediately from his previous career in law enforcement, a chemical marker capable of triggering a primal warning within the human brain. He lowered every window, driving the vehicle back to Hope's Drive with his head almost hanging into the humid air. He desperately attempted convincing himself it was merely a bag of decaying garbage abandoned in the heat. When Cindy arrived home from work and noticed the abandoned car, her maternal anger overwhelmed the sensory warning signs. She opened the doors, searching through the debris scattered across the cabin. Inside, she discovered her daughter's purse, scattered toys, and an empty pizza box crawling with maggots. The stench had soaked into the seat fabric, thick and unmistakable. Yet cognitive dissonance remains a powerful defense. Cindy cleaned the car, spraying generous amounts of air freshener while aggressively scrubbing away the physical evidence as her thoughts raced. She needed to locate her daughter. Using the social media contacts she had collected, Cindy methodically located the boyfriend's address. She drove to the apartment complex, pounded upon the door, and forced her way inside. When she discovered her daughter relaxed, socializing with friends, completely unconcerned, the confrontation immediately turned explosive. The grandmother physically seized the younger woman, pulling her from the apartment before the stunned roommates and forcing her into the car. Throughout the tense drive home, Cindy repeatedly demanded to know where her granddaughter was. Every answer remained evasive, changing with each passing mile. Back inside the beige stucco walls of their home, the psychological barrier collapsed. Trapped inside the living room, facing the absolute certainty of her mother's fury, the 22-year-old finally abandoned the beach trip story. She faced her parents and delivered the ultimate shock. She admitted the child had been missing for 31 days. Cindy's response was visceral. She grabbed the phone, calling emergency services 3 separate times in rapid succession. The sequence of those calls revealed the complete collapse of her reality. During the first call, she asked police for assistance arresting her daughter for stealing the car and money. By the last, most frantic call, the grandmother's voice completely broke into hysterical sobs. She informed the operator she had located her daughter, but her granddaughter had vanished. She clearly stated the car smelled as though a dead body had been inside. Authorities arrived within minutes. The mood inside the living room was extraordinarily tense. George wandered the floor. Cindy was hyperventilating, trapped between overwhelming fear for the child and consuming rage toward her daughter. Meanwhile, the missing toddler's mother remained disturbingly calm. Her resting heart rate seemed perfectly normal. She didn't cry, she didn't panic. Instead, she sat with the responding deputies and smoothly launched into the most elaborate deception of her life. She informed the officers she hadn't lost the child. She insisted the child had been abducted. She immediately supplied a name, Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. According to the account she created, Zenaida was a trusted babysitter introduced through a former coworker. She described the precise timeline of the supposed abduction, explaining she had dropped the toddler at the sitter's apartment complex on June 9th, only returning hours later to discover the unit vacant. When questioned about waiting an entire month before reporting the abduction, she claimed she had spent the previous 4 weeks carrying out a desperate underground search. Afraid contacting law enforcement would place her daughter's life in immediate danger, detectives pressed for details, attempting to ground the story in reality. The mother supplied an astonishing amount of specifics. She portrayed the babysitter as a woman in her mid-20s, originally from New York, driving a silver Ford. She gave investigators the apartment complex name where the exchange supposedly happened, the Sawgrass Apartments. She even supplied phone numbers and described the interior arrangement of the sitter's residence. It was a masterclass in misdirection. Investigators wrote frantically, recording every detail, unaware they had entered a carefully engineered maze. A missing child investigation during its crucial early hours depends completely upon the accuracy of the timeline and the final confirmed contacts. By presenting a non-existent suspect with an extremely detailed profile, the mother successfully redirected the entire investigative operation. Law enforcement immediately launched efforts to locate the elusive nanny. Officers were dispatched to the Sawgrass apartments, searching for the silver vehicle and knocking on doors to confirm the tenant roster. They checked every phone number she supplied. The entire attention of local police shifted toward finding a woman who simply never existed. Meanwhile, officers at the house requested a formal interview with the mother at the station. She agreed immediately without hesitation. She sat inside the rear of the patrol car, leaving her devastated parents standing in the driveway. While detectives started securing the white Pontiac for forensic examination, the investigation's true magnitude gradually became apparent. The air freshener Cindy had sprayed failed to conceal the chemical signature of death, escaping through the trunk lining. The search for the missing toddler had officially begun, yet authorities were charging directly into a dead end, completely unaware the mastermind behind the nightmare sat calmly inside their interview room. On the morning of July 16th, detectives placed the 22-year-old mother inside an unmarked vehicle and drove toward the enormous Universal Studios complex. Their strategy was brutally straightforward. Let the suspect continue leading until physical reality forced the deception to collapse. She guided them directly toward a specific employee parking lot, displaying complete confidence. She escorted investigators beyond a security checkpoint, moving briskly through long, echoing administrative hallways. She never hesitated. Her breathing stayed perfectly steady. She maneuvered throughout the maze-like corporate office building as though she visited it every single day. The detectives followed silently, documenting each movement, patiently awaiting the inevitable collision. Eventually, the hallway came to an abrupt end before a row of closed office doors. The setting could no longer sustain manipulation. She halted, remained perfectly motionless for several seconds, faced the officers, and quietly admitted she had not worked there for years. The entire corporate identity, the supposed coworker who introduced the babysitter, the work shifts, the salary, it had all been an illusion. At the same time, the frantic search for the imaginary nanny reached a solid dead end. Investigators had urgently canvassed the Sawgrass apartments, the precise location where the alleged handoff supposedly occurred. Management retrieved tenant records covering the entire complex. No Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez appeared anywhere within their system. They examined the exact apartment number the mother had confidently included in her official statement. That particular unit had remained vacant, stripped down to bare walls, for more than 100 days. The kidnapping story was an elaborate framework of deception created to consume critical investigative hours. By evening, the illusion had completely collapsed. Police arrested the mother, placing her in handcuffs on charges of child neglect, obstructing a criminal investigation, and making false statements. With the suspect confined inside a county jail cell, law enforcement shifted complete attention toward the abandoned white Pontiac Sunfire. The vehicle was moved into a secure forensic bay. The visual examination revealed nothing conclusive, yet the olfactory evidence remained overwhelming. Cadaver dogs entered the garage and immediately alerted on the trunk, indicating the unmistakable presence of human remains. Yet odor alone cannot secure a murder conviction. Detectives had to transform that scent into scientifically admissible courtroom evidence. Investigators collected air samples from the trunk compartment and forwarded them to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. The findings were unprecedented within criminal forensics. Analysis detected 51 separate chemical compounds, a distinctive signature associated with early human decomposition. Even more disturbing, the air contained extraordinarily high, entirely abnormal levels of chloroform. It was a powerful chemical sedative, suggesting a premeditated means of control. Crime scene technicians carefully vacuumed the trunk lining, searching for microscopic physical evidence. They recovered one strand of light brown hair. Under a high-powered microscope, a forensic analyst observed a distinctive dark band near the root. Root banding represents an extremely specific biological phenomenon. It happens almost exclusively when hair separates from a decomposing human body. Mitochondrial DNA analysis confirmed the strand originated from the maternal lineage of the Anthony family. The scientific evidence was cold, definitive, and unforgiving. The missing toddler was not spending the summer at the beach, nor had she been abducted by a mysterious babysitter. Instead, the physical evidence strongly indicated she had been confined inside that car's trunk, while the Florida heat hastened her decomposition. As summer gradually faded into a humid autumn, the local community's response transformed from profound concern into raw, relentless hatred. The beige house on Hope's Drive became a fortress under constant siege. Hundreds of demonstrators flooded the neatly maintained lawns each day, carrying hostile signs and shouting through bullhorns. Media satellite trucks crowded the street, broadcasting the family's suffering around the clock. Furious citizens hurled garbage and fast food cups onto the property, demanding justice for a child they had never known. Inside, George and Cindy Anthony remained trapped within a psychological purgatory. They endured the relentless public condemnation of their daughter, while desperately holding on to the rapidly fading hope that their granddaughter might somehow still be alive. December 11, 2008. Temperatures across central Florida had finally cooled, clearing away the suffocating summer humidity. A utility meter reader named Roy Kronk was making his way through a dense, swampy section of woods located just off Suburban Drive. The location was frighteningly close, scarcely a quarter mile from the Anthony family driveway. The landscape was unforgiving, clogged with dense palmetto bushes, thorn-covered undergrowth, and deep, stagnant water remaining after tropical storms. As he forced his way through the brush, something unusual caught his attention, partially submerged beneath the muck. It was a black plastic garbage bag, badly torn by weather and local wildlife. He nudged the heavy plastic using his meter-reading stick, attempting to free it from the thick mud. A small, pale object rolled through the opening and settled among the damp leaves. It was a young human skull. Kronk immediately dropped his equipment, backed away from the tree line, and called emergency services. The location was immediately secured, turning the quiet, overgrown woodland into an enormous forensic search grid. Investigators wearing protective equipment waded through knee-deep swamp water to examine a horrifying scene. The skeletal remains of a young child were dispersed among the roots and mud. The bones had been tightly wrapped inside a familiar Winnie the Pooh blanket, placed within a canvas laundry bag, then double-wrapped inside heavy black plastic trash bags. A small shirt displaying the phrase "Big Trouble comes in small packages" was recovered from the sludge. Yet the most incriminating evidence appeared upon the skull itself. 3 strips of heavy-duty silver duct tape remained fixed directly across the mandible and maxillary regions, attached exactly where the mouth and nose had once been. The adhesive had fused with the bone after months of exposure. The tape stayed firmly in place, preserving the precise, horrifying method used to permanently silence the 2-year-old girl. The desperate, disturbing 31-day search had officially ended. The truth hidden within the woods delivered the final answer. In May 2011, the Orange County Courthouse became the center of a nationwide obsession. Its perimeter was surrounded by hundreds of satellite trucks, vocal protesters, and spectators desperate to secure seats inside the gallery. The public had already judged and convicted the mother. They were merely waiting for the legal system to authorize the lethal injection. Yet the defense shattered that expectation on the very first day. The lead attorney addressed the jury and completely abandoned the kidnapping narrative. The imaginary babysitter disappeared from the record. Instead, the defense presented a new grim explanation, asserting the toddler had accidentally drowned in the family pool. The attorney contended the child's grandfather panicked and, while attempting to shield his daughter from neglect charges, disposed of the body and orchestrated the cover-up. The defense portrayed a deeply dysfunctional household where intimidation dominated daily life, forcing the young mother into a profound state of psychological denial to survive the trauma. The prosecution responded with uncompromising forensic science. They systematically presented the 31 days of silence. They introduced the trunk air analysis, the single root banded hair, and 3 strips of silver duct tape permanently bonded to the bone. They submitted digital evidence recovered from the home computer, revealing someone had researched the chemical characteristics of chloroform only months earlier. The prosecution argued the mother intentionally suffocated her child to escape parental responsibility and embrace her beautiful life without the emotional and financial responsibilities of motherhood. For 6 weeks, the jury considered the opposing narratives. The prosecution possessed devastating behavioral evidence, showing a woman celebrating while her daughter decomposed. The defense relied upon reasonable doubt, aggressively challenging the reliability of the developing science behind the trunk air samples, while emphasizing the absence of a conclusive anatomical cause of death. because the remains had become fully skeletonized. On July 5, 2011, the jury returned after fewer than 11 hours of deliberation. The swiftness of the verdict felt devastating. Outside, the enormous crowd became completely silent as courtroom audio echoed across the street. The clerk announced the verdict: on the charge of first-degree murder, not guilty; on the charge of aggravated child abuse, not guilty; on the charge of aggravated manslaughter, not guilty. She was found guilty only on 4 misdemeanor counts of providing false information to law enforcement. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. A collective cry of raw outrage erupted throughout the crowd. The verdict sent shockwaves across the nation, fundamentally shattering public confidence in the judicial system. Millions struggled to understand how a trunk carrying the odor of death, a fabricated life, and a skull bound with tape failed to result in a murder conviction. The mother cried at the defense table, preserving her physical freedom while forever solidifying her status as an outcast. Under the cover of darkness, she exited the county jail and climbed into an armored SUV, escorted by armed deputies protecting her from the furious mob gathered outside the gates. She was legally free yet permanently ostracized, condemned to isolation within a country that overwhelmingly despised her. The justice system had delivered its final verdict, yet it provided absolutely no genuine closure. The precise circumstances of the crime and the disturbing motive behind it remained forever buried beneath that murky Florida swamp. Ultimately, a compulsive liar regained her long-desired, unburdened life, while a 2-year-old girl remained forever without a voice, her final moments forever imprisoned within suffocating, eternal darkness. Whom are we truly meant to believe in this life, if not those standing nearest to us? Unfortunately, our world is often filled with deception, betrayal, and darkness. At times, that darkness transforms into something deadly in the most unimaginable way. During October 2012, 24-year-old Rebecca Gay vanished in the middle of broad daylight. Initially, no one could explain what had taken place. Yet as detectives pursued every lead, the investigation reached a chilling turning point. The individual behind it was not an unknown stranger. It was somebody Rebecca believed in, somebody her family believed in, and somebody the entire community had accepted. Halloween has always been recognized as an eerie season filled with costumes, decorations, candy, and innocent frights. Yet for Rebecca and everyone who cared about her, that Halloween turned into a genuine nightmare. A dangerous individual had concealed himself beneath the appearance of an ordinary, respectable person. Honestly, that is much more terrifying than any fictional tale. Rebecca Gay entered the world on the 26th of March, 1988, born to Thomas and Sally Gay. She was raised in Midland, Michigan alongside her 3 siblings. Her father, Thomas, earned deep respect throughout the community. Residents recognized him for his knowledge of horseback riding, horse care, and training. He even helped establish a charitable horse race that collected funds for a children's hospital. Thomas possessed a generous spirit toward both people and animals. He provided a lasting example for his children, showing them the importance of family, faith, dedication, and remaining united. Rebecca spent her childhood in a small town where everyday life seemed secure and familiar. Neighbors recognized one another, everyone watched over each other, and she filled her days playing outdoors with her siblings, attending church, and going to school. Even during childhood, Rebecca was kind, caring, and compassionate. In countless ways, she reflected the same warmth her parents had given her. Later, her father was diagnosed with a terminal illness. As his health steadily declined, the family faced the heartbreaking decision to move him into hospice care, where he could receive continuous attention and comfort. His wife and children visited whenever possible, hoping to bring joy into his remaining days. During that period, Rebecca remained in high school. She belonged to the equestrian team and volunteered during school archery events, helping collect money for families facing hardship. In countless ways, she had already begun following her father's example of kindness and service. Following her graduation in 2007, Rebecca pursued a profession within the beauty field. She entered cosmetology school and trained to become a hairstylist. During that period, she was involved in a committed relationship with Chad Sando. Rebecca completed her training and accepted a position at a salon in Mount Pleasant, close to where her mother resided. Following Thomas's death, Sally experienced overwhelming loneliness. Her children had matured and were creating lives of their own, and for the first time in countless years, she faced life ahead without her husband. Sally had shared many years of marriage with Thomas, and adjusting to living alone proved challenging. Hoping for companionship, she later explored online dating. She was not actually searching for another husband. More than anything, she longed for somebody to speak with, somebody willing to listen, and somebody capable of making her feel less isolated. Sally relocated to a mobile home in Broomfield Valley Trailer Park. Before long, she connected with a man online and started exchanging messages. His name was John Douglas White, and he resided in Augusta, Michigan, roughly 2 hours away. Soon afterward, Sally and John began living together. John also accepted a position as pastor at a nearby church, the very church where Sally taught Sunday school. They appreciated each other's companionship and held similar Christian beliefs. Mount Pleasant, Michigan had a population of slightly under 20,000 residents. Sally's neighborhood was approximately 20 minutes away in a peaceful rural community surrounded by farmland. It appeared tranquil, the sort of place where any family could feel secure. Rebecca, Sally's youngest daughter, eventually discovered she was expecting. After her son, Connor, arrived, Rebecca and Chad worked to provide him with a stable, loving home. Yet raising a baby can place tremendous strain upon a young couple. Chad found the adjustments following Connor's birth difficult. Motherhood transformed Rebecca completely, and Chad could not cope with that changed reality. For Rebecca, Connor became the center of her life. Everything she accomplished centered on giving him the finest life possible. She had always been dependable and compassionate, yet becoming a mother gave her an even greater sense of purpose. She worked tirelessly to manage her career while raising a child independently. It was never simple, but Rebecca never complained. She approached every day with patience, thankfulness, and determination. Wanting support and hoping to remain close to family, Rebecca rented a mobile home within the same neighborhood where her mother lived in Broomfield Valley Trailer Park. Having Sally nearby made her feel more secure. Sally and John lived directly across the street from her. Rebecca and her young son spent nearly every evening at her mother's home. John prepared dinner for them, and naturally, he also helped care for Connor. He genuinely appeared to enjoy the idea of having family surrounding him. He happily embraced the role of a father figure for Rebecca and almost a grandfather to Connor. He regularly drove Connor to daycare and looked after him whenever Rebecca was occupied. For some time, Rebecca continued advancing her cosmetology career, but after Connor arrived, working extended hours at the salon became significantly more difficult. Therefore, she accepted a position at a retail store in Mount Pleasant. She relied on her mother and John to help care for Connor, because by then they all seemed almost like one close family. Rebecca connected well with the people she worked beside, and before long she advanced into a management position. Her private life was progressing as well. Around the period Connor was approximately 1 year old, she met Aaron Quinn. Aaron embraced Connor as though he were his own son. He loved and respected Rebecca, and he intended to propose to her. His family embraced Rebecca as one of their own, while Sally, together with John White, supported their relationship. Rebecca welcomed John into her family without any hesitation. One time, when John came down with a severe cold, she prepared soup for him, collected medicine, and even had pizza delivered. John was consistently there whenever she required assistance with Connor. Because of that, Rebecca enjoyed a dependable support network around her. From the outside, everything suggested she had a promising future waiting. Having caring people around her meant everything to Rebecca. Her life might have seemed modest, but she surrounded it with affection, kindness, and compassion. Above all else, she wanted her son to have everything necessary. By 2012, Connor had reached 3 years old, and Halloween was quickly approaching. Rebecca felt especially thrilled because it had remained her favorite holiday since she was a child. Connor was finally old enough to appreciate costumes and trick-or-treating, and they had already chosen an adorable Spider-Man costume for him. At the store Rebecca supervised, a delivery of scarecrows had arrived, and she purchased 8 for her yard. She enjoyed decorating for the holiday, displaying pumpkins, draping fake cobwebs, and placing spooky signs across the door. On the evening before Halloween, Rebecca stayed home alone with Connor. Early the following morning, Connor was supposed to be dropped off with Chad, his biological father, where he would spend the day. After work, Rebecca intended to collect him, help him into his costume, and take him trick-or-treating for the first time. She felt so excited that she phoned both her mother and Aaron to share her plans. That night, as always, Rebecca sounded cheerful, devoted to her son, and prepared to celebrate Halloween. Nobody had the slightest idea that the holiday would never arrive for her. Throughout the previous several months, Rebecca had been assigned the morning shift so she could enjoy additional time with Connor. Therefore, when she failed to report for work on the 31st of October 2012, her supervisors and fellow employees were immediately puzzled. Rebecca had neither phoned in nor informed anyone she would miss work. As a manager, she was reliable and conscientious, so nobody assumed she had merely overslept or avoided work. What made the situation even more concerning was that no one could contact her. Management asked one of her coworkers to stop by her home. Perhaps something had gone wrong, and perhaps she required assistance. However, after he knocked on the door, nobody responded. The residence appeared deserted. He tested the front door, but it seemed secured. Therefore, he returned to his car and began driving toward the store. Along the route, something drew his attention. Only a short distance from Rebecca's trailer, there stood a bar. Parked in its lot was a light blue four-door Buick. It belonged to Rebecca Gay. Yet that made absolutely no sense because she had a driveway directly outside her home. Her coworker entered the bar to ask about the Buick. The bartender, who had worked the previous evening shift, explained he had noticed the car, but Rebecca had never entered. The previous night, Rebecca had been with her son, making it unlikely she would visit a bar while leaving Connor alone. Even so, the bar employees located the phone number for the trailer park owner. The owner agreed to unlock Rebecca's door so her coworker could check inside. Rebecca was only 24, youthful and healthy. Still, perhaps there had been some emergency. Perhaps she was inside, unable to respond. Yet Rebecca was nowhere there. The only item left outside was her favorite purse resting open across the table. It was the purse Aaron had bought for her, and she hardly ever went anywhere without carrying it. Her coworker called Sally and John to ask whether Rebecca had shared any plans for that day. As soon as Sally learned her daughter had failed to arrive at work, she hurried to Rebecca's home with John. Neighbors started gathering outside the trailer, wondering where Rebecca might have gone. By midday, her family reported her missing to the county sheriff's department. But initially, authorities hesitated to begin a full search because Rebecca was an adult. They refused to expect the worst immediately, although they acknowledged the entire situation seemed unusual. Police chose to wait until 4:30 p.m., when Rebecca was expected to collect Connor simply to ensure this was not a misunderstanding. Missing work was one matter, but not contacting her family, ignoring her boyfriend, and then failing to arrive for her little boy would be entirely different. If a mother never arrived to collect her child, then something was obviously wrong. Because of that choice, 4.5 precious hours were lost. Those hours could have been spent gathering information, searching for evidence, and gaining a clearer understanding of what had happened to Rebecca. Her family had no choice except wait. John White started contacting Rebecca's friends and acquaintances. Because he served as a pastor, he also contacted members of his church, asking them to assist with the search. Sally prayed her daughter remain safe and hoped Rebecca would soon return with an explanation. Everyone who cared about her tried avoiding panic, but it became harder with every passing minute. That morning, Connor was supposed to be dropped off at a grocery store parking lot where Chad would collect him. Since Rebecca was working the morning shift, John and Sally stepped forward to help. John reached Rebecca's trailer around 7 a.m. While Rebecca was inside the bathroom preparing for work, he waited until Connor awakened, dressed him, and took him to meet his father. John said he observed nothing unusual that morning. Therefore, he could not explain where Rebecca might have disappeared so suddenly. By 4:30 p.m., Rebecca still had not arrived. Police secured a search warrant for her home and vehicle, and finally started examining what had occurred. They first searched inside the trailer. Officers found the open purse, but Rebecca's keys and cell phone were gone. There were no indications of forced entry. That suggested either Rebecca had carried those belongings with her or the person responsible had removed them. The most alarming discovery inside was an area of the hallway carpet. It appeared fluffier than everything surrounding it, almost as though someone had recently cleaned there. When detectives examined it more carefully, they noticed dark streaks. It might have been blood, or perhaps Connor had spilled something, and Rebecca had attempted to clean it away. Next, officers discovered tiny blood droplets on one wall. They also observed small marks across the kitchen cabinets and a door handle. These represented serious warning signs. Soon afterward, police sealed the trailer with yellow crime scene tape, making the Halloween decorations surrounding the home appear even more disturbing. Investigators afterward inspected Rebecca's car. Immediately, something appeared unusual. Rebecca was petite, so she normally positioned the driver's seat close beside the steering wheel. But now the seat had been moved much farther back. From that distance, Rebecca could not have reached the pedals. The vehicle's location also created concern. It had been parked away from her trailer, partially concealed behind trees. At that stage, police no longer considered this a simple disappearance. They believed something terrible had taken place. Detectives interviewed Rebecca's relatives, friends, and co-workers, attempting to determine who could have wanted to harm her. Yet, nobody identified anyone. Rebecca was gentle, reserved, and avoided trouble. She was never involved with anything risky and appeared to have no enemies. While neighborhood children celebrated Halloween and traveled door to door collecting candy, Rebecca's family remained consumed by fear. Connor's first true Halloween would always be connected to his mother's disappearance. That day, he never had the chance to wear his Spider-Man costume or experience the holiday Rebecca had arranged. John requested a church elder to pray for Rebecca's safe return. It is difficult to imagine what her family endured that night. People wandered around wearing frightening costumes, some covered with fake blood, while actual blood had been discovered inside Rebecca's home. For her family, Halloween was changed forever. Costumes no longer seemed innocent because in reality, a dangerous individual could conceal himself behind any face. The first two individuals police investigated were Chad Sando, Connor's father and Rebecca's former boyfriend, and Aaron Quinn, her current boyfriend. In cases involving a missing woman, current and former partners are usually questioned first, so both men were taken to the station. Aaron cooperated fully and appeared truly heartbroken. He understood how important that day was to Rebecca. He informed police he had last talked with her the previous night at 10:43 p.m. He sent her a good-night text, but she never replied. He believed she had simply fallen asleep. He grew even more concerned the following morning when she failed to answer his usual good morning message. Even worse, the message never went through. That indicated Rebecca's phone had either been switched off or was out of service. That information helped investigators narrow the time frame when Rebecca stopped communicating. After investigators verified Aaron's whereabouts that morning, suspicion surrounding him gradually disappeared. Aaron shared something heartbreaking with detectives. For several weeks, he had been preparing to propose to Rebecca. He had been putting money aside for a ring and intended to propose on Halloween night, her favorite holiday. Yet those dreams were never going to come true. Briefly, police considered whether Rebecca had wanted to leave Aaron and begin again somewhere different. However, that possibility quickly collapsed. Everyone who knew them explained Rebecca loved Aaron and hoped to marry him. They had discussed their future, their shared life, and creating a family. Next, detectives interviewed Chad. He did not have very much to contribute. He spoke warmly about Rebecca and said that despite their history, they had stayed on good terms and were both doing everything possible for their son. Following that, investigators turned their attention toward another man close to Rebecca, Pastor John White, Sally's fiancé and one of the primary people helping care for Connor. As far as police understood, John might have been the final person to interact with Rebecca that morning when he arrived to collect Connor while she prepared for work. Detectives questioned John thoroughly. What had Rebecca been wearing? Did she appear ordinary? Did she mention going directly to work or stopping anywhere first? How was Connor behaving? Did the child mention anything? John attempted to cooperate and described the morning step by step. He explained that when he reached Rebecca's trailer, the porch light remained on and the front door stood unlocked, so he believed she was awake and preparing herself. Inside, he could hear water flowing from the bathroom. According to John, he never actually saw Rebecca. He only recognized her voice. She called out that Connor was still sleeping, told him he could rest for a while, and asked him to switch off the heat before they departed. John said he lay down on the couch and drifted asleep. Around 8 a.m., Connor awakened him. By then, John assumed Rebecca had already left for work. Therefore, he dressed Connor and took him to meet Chad. Initially, the account seemed believable. However, detectives noticed recent cuts across John's nose and hands. The injuries appeared as though they may have resulted from someone attempting to defend themselves. When questioned about them, John explained that he had been making repairs inside his own trailer when a shelf collapsed and struck him on the nose. He even offered to demonstrate what had happened. For the time being, detectives accepted his account and allowed him to leave. However, they continued their investigation. They interviewed neighbors, family members, co-workers, friends, and anyone connected to Rebecca in an effort to understand her relationship with John. As more information emerged, police began noticing details that caused them to view the case from another perspective. Until a different suspect was identified, they chose to maintain their attention on John. Investigators also spoke with roughly 24 members of the church. Nearly everyone appeared to admire Pastor White. Sally attended the same church and taught Sunday school there. At one point, she noticed an available position for a pastor and informed John about it because he had received a minister's license years earlier. John agreed to pursue the opportunity. The church elder who selected him told detectives that Pastor White was a religious man and had no involvement in Rebecca's disappearance. People portrayed him as kind, supportive, and approachable. John had assisted many individuals, not only Rebecca. He cleaned her gutters whenever necessary, helped a family with 6 children construct a backyard deck, and frequently cared for their children. He had been part of Rebecca and Sally's lives for over 6 years, completely gaining their confidence. Detectives explained they needed to eliminate every person close to Rebecca as a possibility. But as they continued questioning people in the community, rumors began circulating that police were investigating Pastor John White. Gradually, the way people viewed him started to change. Employees at the nearby bar revealed another side of him. They claimed Pastor White enjoyed consuming strong alcohol, which did not match the impression many people held of him. They also stated that he had visited the bar on Halloween morning asking about Rebecca. Some of Rebecca's co-workers revealed something even more concerning. According to them, Rebecca had mentioned several times that John made her feel extremely uneasy. She had even considered relocating. And they were not the only people who sensed something unusual between John White and Rebecca. Aaron had noticed it as well. Rebecca's boyfriend described John as fixated. He explained that after Rebecca received a permanent hairstyle, White started visiting every day simply to praise her. He would appear at her house and even her workplace without any notice. To Aaron, that behavior seemed inappropriate. John did not appear to view Rebecca as a daughter figure. Instead, it seemed as though he regarded her as a young and attractive woman. John's younger sister later informed police that he frequently called her with excitement about finally having a true family with Sally, Rebecca, and little Connor. However, after Rebecca began seeing Aaron and spent less time around Sally and John, his attitude shifted. He started saying that after all he had done for Rebecca, she had pushed him away. He continued repeating the same complaint. At the time, his sister dismissed it as nothing serious. After all, why would a young woman want to spend every moment with older people? But after Rebecca vanished, those remarks seemed much more significant. John's sister questioned whether he had forgotten that he was involved with Sally, not Rebecca. His interest in Rebecca appeared unhealthy, especially considering what investigators would soon discover about his history. Because people described the pastor in such conflicting ways, police requested that John undergo a polygraph examination. It seemed like the quickest method to either reduce suspicion or uncover whether he was concealing something. John was hesitant. He understood that polygraphs were not completely reliable and could be influenced by pressure or feelings. Eventually, Sally persuaded him to take the test, hoping it would demonstrate that he had no involvement in Rebecca's disappearance. When John eventually consented, a detective collected him in a patrol vehicle and asked him to sit in the front seat. The detective hoped that during the drive to another city, where the polygraph machine was kept, John might become comfortable and start talking. At first, they exchanged casual conversation. Gradually, John became less guarded. Before arriving at the station, he revealed why he had been hesitant. He admitted that he had a criminal past that almost no one knew about, including Sally and the church, and these were not minor incidents. John had previously been connected to an attempted case. According to John, he had been far younger at that time and was no longer the same person. He explained that he had made poor decisions, some of which resulted in convictions. But in his view, that period of his life had ended. He had completed his sentence and changed the direction of his life. When the church offered him another opportunity, he said he treated it with complete seriousness. While authorities continued searching for answers, the community refused to remain inactive. Volunteers combed the area surrounding Rebecca's home, hoping to discover anything that could help locate her. Social media became filled with requests for information. Posters displaying Rebecca's photograph were placed throughout town, on poles, inside shop windows, and across community boards. As each hour passed, the pressure became greater. but no definite answers appeared. Meanwhile, detectives examined John's background more closely. What they uncovered was deeply troubling and stunned the police department. To many individuals, John White represented a former criminal restored through faith, a pastor who used his past experiences to help others. But now the question became clear. Who was Pastor John truly? John Douglas White was born on the 20th of May, 1957. He had two sisters and shared a close bond with both of them. Their father served as police chief, fire chief, and mayor of Augusta, Michigan. Because of his father's reputation, John understood that mistakes would quickly become known, so he generally tried to stay out of trouble. By all accounts, he experienced an ordinary childhood and spent significant time with his family. After finishing high school, White enlisted in the Navy. Later, he was released, married, and began creating a life for himself. At his new residence, he developed a friendship with a neighbor named Teresa Etherton. One day, John invited Teresa into his basement, claiming he wanted to show her a model car racing track that he said he had constructed. Teresa trusted him. He was her neighbor, and she had no reason to believe she was unsafe. After they entered the basement, John suddenly attacked her from behind. Teresa turned in disbelief and saw him holding a knife with an unusual, distressed expression on his face. Moments afterward, the assault continued. He wounded Teresa several times and then attempted to overpower her. Somehow, she survived and managed to escape from the basement. After receiving medical treatment, she informed authorities about who had attacked her. Teresa later stated that White told her this was not the first time he had targeted women. It was obvious he had serious problems. John was arrested, charged, and convicted of attempted assault, but he told his wife an entirely different version. He claimed that he and Teresa had been in the basement smoking when she attacked him with a knife because she wanted his stash. He said that explained the cuts on his hands. During the trial, White appeared regretful. He described himself as a foolish young man who had made a horrible mistake and promised it would never happen again. At that point, he was 22 years old. For the attack, White received a sentence of 5 to 10 years in prison and was required to undergo psychological counseling. 2 years later, in 1983, he appealed the conviction, arguing that his attorney had failed to properly represent him. Ultimately, White received a significantly reduced outcome. After spending only 2 years incarcerated, he was released on 2 years of probation with ongoing mental health treatment. As a result, John White walked away with an unexpectedly lenient punishment for what he had done to a defenseless young woman. Because of a legal error and a judge willing to offer compassion, John returned to society. But the dangerous impulses within him never disappeared. 10 years later, he was a father of 2 with another child on the way. He had spent years working as a truck driver, but after becoming a father, he accepted a more stable position at an industrial laundry where he maintained machinery. During that period, his troubling urges toward women started appearing once again. In July of 1994, 26-year-old Vicky Sue Wall vanished. She worked at the same laundry facility as John, and the two were involved in an affair. They would secretly meet in the rear parking area of a store, inside White's pickup truck. That parking lot became the final location where Vicky was ever seen. Investigators quickly focused their attention on John White. He admitted they had been having an affair, but insisted he had taken Vicky home shortly after they appeared on surveillance footage. According to his statement, she was alive and unharmed the last time he saw her. Then White revealed something even more disturbing to detectives. He claimed he experienced blackouts, meaning he might not know whether he had harmed Vicky. Later, he told his wife that he could no longer continue living like that and said he wanted to take his own life. Instead, he left the home and became intoxicated. Forensic investigators later discovered blood evidence inside White's truck, but the amount was insufficient for DNA analysis. At that time, investigators required a larger biological sample to produce a dependable result. 6 weeks afterward, someone discovered a white tennis shoe lying in the grass about 3 kilometers from the parking lot. Nearby, there were signs of dragging and a strong odor of decomposition. The path continued to women's underwear and eventually led to a severely decomposed body. It was the remains of Vicky Sue Wall. Since the body had been exposed to outdoor conditions, the medical examiner could not establish the exact cause of death. But Vicky had been found partly unclothed, with her shirt and bra positioned around her neck. This was clearly not a natural death. At that point, John White remained the primary suspect. He was being held in a psychiatric hospital, and investigators believed he might attempt to use an insanity defense to avoid prison once again. White declined to take a polygraph and refused to openly discuss Vicky. Without sufficient evidence to prove exactly what occurred, prosecutors presented him with a deal. He accepted it and pleaded guilty to manslaughter. At sentencing, the judge referred to White's history involving women and handed him the highest possible punishment, 8 to 15 years in prison. However, police had learned even more. According to friends and family members, John had boasted that while working as a truck driver, he regularly picked up workers and referred to them using a cruel nickname. He claimed that after using their services, he would pull over near dumpsters and abandon them there, as though their lives had no value. None of those women ever reported him, but his account seemed disturbingly credible when compared to what he had done to Teresa Etherton and what occurred with Vicky Sue Wall. While incarcerated, White told his psychologist that he wanted to hurt the prosecutor, his attorney, and the judge. He also confessed to having disturbing fantasies involving their bodies after death. During his imprisonment, his wife divorced him and both of his parents died. Then White began studying the Bible. He claimed he had found repentance and devoted his life to God. He participated in group therapy, met with mental health specialists, obtained a minister's license, and as a model inmate, spent much of his time inside the chapel. Despite the continued presence of warning signs, authorities believed his change was genuine. In 2007, White was released into society without probation or supervision. After leaving prison, White relocated north to rebuild his life. Through online communication, he met Sally, Rebecca Gay's mother. He moved into her trailer park home and became a pastor in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. When he sought the church position, White presented a far less serious version of his past. He claimed he had been involved with a woman who took advantage of him and that she died from an overdose. According to his story, he panicked, fled, and suffered the consequences. Naturally, the church accepted his explanation. John frequently expressed gratitude to the small congregation for allowing him another opportunity, but beneath the surface, he had never truly changed. He had only created a new life far removed from his previous one. Even so, the disturbing thoughts in his mind never truly vanished. It was obvious John had a serious issue, and investigators now had to consider whether he had acted on those impulses against Rebecca. While Pastor John White was undergoing the polygraph examination, detectives investigated his history. What they uncovered left them stunned. His criminal record revealed a lengthy and troubling pattern of behavior toward women. John had not completely concealed his previous legal problems, but the reality had been heavily minimized. The church was aware he had a criminal background, yet the elder believed John was a changed man of faith, who was focused on the present and attempting to grow from his past mistakes. White assisted church members by caring for their children and appeared to maintain a peaceful, respectable lifestyle. But now, investigators had to face a disturbing possibility. Had he been concealing his darker motives all along? After police understood how effectively the pastor had deceived those around him, they began looking beyond the carefully created image. The polygraph indicated that many of his responses were likely deceptive. With this information, detectives obtained a warrant to search his truck and trailer. Within the truck, they discovered red stains and a damaged necklace that appeared to have been ripped from someone. It was later confirmed to be Rebecca's necklace. In the cab area, they located zip ties, large construction garbage bags, and small women's underwear that matched Rebecca's size. Inside the trailer, they also discovered a rubber mallet containing bloodstains. Police confronted White with the evidence, but he continued claiming Rebecca had been abducted and that he had no knowledge of what happened to her. The questioning continued for nearly 12 hours. By the early hours of the 1st of November 2012, detectives understood that ordinary interrogation methods might never make him confess. Therefore, they attempted another strategy. They turned their attention to Sally, John's partner, and Rebecca's mother. She had improved his life, helped him become a pastor, and accepted him into her family. Detectives explained how devastating it would be for Sally if Rebecca remained missing for much longer. They also reminded him that young Connor would eventually have to live with the heartbreak of losing his mother. They told him that if he genuinely cared about Sally, he needed to reveal the truth. At first, White requested an attorney. However, after officers left him alone to think, he changed his decision. Before admitting anything, he asked for one final phone call with Sally. When she answered, John told her that she was the love of his life, but that she would never want to talk to him again. He offered no explanation. He simply continued apologizing, repeating that nothing could be repaired. Then, without warning, he ended the call. Afterward, Pastor John White requested a deal that would ensure he remained imprisoned for the rest of his life. Then, he confessed to taking Rebecca Gay's life. According to John, he had developed feelings of attraction toward Rebecca. On the night before Halloween, he had been viewing disturbing adult material online involving an interest in death. After consuming several large beers, he went to Rebecca's residence. It was approximately 2 a.m., and the doors were unlocked. Earlier that same day, when he had visited Connor and Rebecca, John had deliberately left the back door open. John entered the home. When Rebecca heard the door, she stepped out from her bedroom. He struck her multiple times with a rubber mallet. Before she became unconscious, Rebecca looked at White and told him she knew exactly who he was. The final person she saw was someone she had trusted completely. When John noticed Rebecca was still alive, he placed a zip tie around her neck and tightened it. He then remained there and watched as her life slowly disappeared. Afterward, he carried her into the kitchen and removed her clothing. He later stated that he could not recall whether he had any interaction with her body after she died. He attempted to remove the blood using spray cleaner and towels. He switched off Rebecca's phone, took her Buick keys, left the vehicle near the bar, and discarded the keys and phone into a nearby dumpster to mislead investigators. Then he returned, placed Rebecca's clothing and the towels into a large construction garbage bag together with her body. However, while loading the bag into his truck, it ripped open. Her damaged necklace fell out, and blood escaped from the bag. Those errors would eventually guide police directly back to him. John abandoned Rebecca's remains in a ravine near the trailer park and spread evidence within approximately a mile of her residence. After hiding what he had done, he went back to Rebecca's trailer and slept on her couch for the remainder of the night. The following morning, he dressed Connor, took him to meet his father, and behaved as though nothing had occurred. Rebecca Gay was eventually discovered in the ravine exactly where White had claimed she would be. Her injuries matched the details of his confession. John White received a sentence of at least 56 years and no more than 85 years in prison. Because he was 55 years old when sentenced, he was almost certain to remain incarcerated for the rest of his life. The judge told him, "Some people have no place in society, and you are one of them." However, White did not live long enough to experience that punishment. 4 months later, on the 28th of August 2013, he ended his own life inside his prison cell. The case of John Douglas White revealed major failures within the justice system. Warning signs had been overlooked repeatedly. A man with a dangerous past had been permitted to return to the community, where families believed he had genuinely transformed. And ultimately, Rebecca Gay suffered the consequences. Alice Huffenagel was born on August 9, 1935 in Pennsylvania. She was raised as one of 10 children, and because of that, she always imagined having a big family of her own. Later, Alice married a man named Charles, and throughout the years they raised 6 children together, 5 daughters and 1 son. Despite having a large family to support, Alice still managed to create something for herself. She launched a small real estate company, and eventually she became fairly successful on her own. Eventually, however, Alice and Charles divorced, leaving her by herself. By then, her children were adults, and she had 10 grandchildren. She hoped to spend as much time with them as possible, but managing her own business still required plenty from her. Therefore, Alice chose to retire from real estate. Meanwhile, she was not someone who could simply remain home with nothing to occupy herself. Instead, she accepted a position at a pharmacy inside her nearby giant supermarket. That allowed Alice more time with her family, while she still had somewhere to go, people to visit, and employment she genuinely enjoyed. Later, Alice met a man named Jack, and before long, they became married. However, the marriage did not survive. Alice quickly learned that Jack had another woman in his life, and afterward they separated. Therefore, by the close of 2002, Alice was 67 years old, living alone, and still employed at the pharmacy. On November 23rd, Alice's former husband, Jack, dialed 911. He explained he had stopped by Alice's home because the previous evening she had phoned and asked him to come over and repair a broken toilet. However, when he pressed the doorbell, nobody responded. So, Jack unlocked the door with his key, walked inside, and began calling Alice's name. Yet the house remained silent. Initially, he assumed she might have gone out somewhere. Then he spotted something unusual. The downstairs bathroom window had been shattered. A fairly severe storm had passed through the previous night. so initially Jack assumed the weather could have caused it. But after moving closer, he noticed what appeared to be blood covering the glass. Then, he realized blood droplets were leading away from the window and farther into the house. Jack headed upstairs, continuing to call Alice's name, and eventually reached her bedroom. After opening the door, he discovered Alice lying on the bed. Some of her clothing was gone, and almost instantly, Jack realized there was nothing he could do to save her. Officers arrived at the house and immediately started processing the scene. Right from the beginning, it was obvious they were investigating a savage murder. Alice's body was covered with scrapes and abrasions, indicating there had been an extended struggle. Part of her head had additionally been wrapped with tape, and her hands had been bound. Later, the medical examiner concluded that Alice had died from strangulation and confirmed she had been sexually assaulted. He also discovered several hairs on her body that definitely did not belong to her. Regarding the time of death, the examiner concluded she had been murdered late that evening or sometime throughout the night. Based upon the scene, detectives believed the blood covering the broken glass downstairs must have belonged to the killer. Most likely, he had shattered the bathroom window to gain entry and injured himself while climbing through. Afterward, he assaulted Alice, and she fought back. Sometime during the attack, he covered her mouth with tape and wound tape around part of her head, before ultimately choking her to death. Following the killing, the murderers seemed to have escaped through the second-floor bedroom window, which had remained open. Detectives believed he likely did not want to climb back through the shattered glass downstairs and risk injuring himself again. Blood evidence collected from the window, together with the hairs recovered from Alice's body, was submitted to the lab, but officials expected the findings to require at least several weeks. Meanwhile, investigators quickly eliminated the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. Numerous valuables remained inside Alice's home, yet the murderer had stolen nothing, not even cash sitting openly in plain sight. Afterward, detectives started examining the most likely individuals first, and naturally, their focus shifted toward Jack. Initially, he attracted attention simply because he was the one who had discovered Alice's body. Before long, however, investigators had stronger reasons to question whether he could have played a role. While speaking with Alice's family, detectives discovered Jack's affair had not been the marriage-only issue. Jack operated a business, and when Alice originally met him, he had portrayed himself as a prosperous businessman. However, in truth, his company was failing and nearing bankruptcy. As time passed, he repeatedly borrowed money from Alice merely to keep the business operating. Yet regardless of how much she supported him, it was never sufficient, and his financial troubles simply continued becoming worse. Then investigators uncovered another fact that made Jack appear even more suspicious. Alice carried a fairly substantial life insurance policy, and if she died, it would provide a large sum of money. Instead of going to Alice's children, however, those funds would go to Jack, because despite moving out 11 months before the murder, he and Alice were still legally married. So now, detectives had a potential financial motive directly before them. If Jack received the insurance money, it could help him resolve the business difficulties that had been steadily closing in on him. Soon afterward, he became their primary suspect. Yet Jack maintained he had an alibi, and investigators quickly confirmed he had been elsewhere when Alice was murdered. He also volunteered a DNA sample, although detectives still needed to wait until the laboratory processed the evidence. There was one more reason Jack did not completely match. As previously mentioned, the murderer appeared to have escaped through a second-floor window before climbing down across the roof. That window was fairly narrow, and detectives were uncertain Jack could have squeezed through it. Beyond that, he was not a younger man, so they struggled to believe he could have climbed out that way and descended from the roof without injuring himself. Detectives continued examining people connected to Alice, and before long, a different man drew their attention. His name was Mike, and he was seeing one of Alice's daughters. What immediately caught investigators' attention was one particular detail. Mike's hand was wrapped in bandages. When detectives began questioning him, his responses only increased their suspicions. They asked how he had injured his hand, and Mike replied he had punched a wall because he struggled controlling his temper. Investigators additionally discovered Mike's own mother had obtained a restraining order against him, meaning he was legally prohibited from approaching her. Mike explained this by claiming his mother suffered from serious mental health problems and insisted he had never actually done anything wrong. To detectives, everything sounded suspicious, But Mike provided an alibi, and Alice's daughter confirmed she had watched him punch the wall, explaining why his hand needed bandaging. Mike also provided police with a DNA sample, and again, detectives were left awaiting the laboratory results. Sometime later, that report finally arrived. The blood recovered from the broken glass inside Alice's house belonged to an unidentified man, and his profile was absent from the FBI database. It also failed to match Jack or Mike, meaning both men could finally be eliminated. Furthermore, experts stated the hairs recovered from Alice's body most likely belonged to an African-American man, although they could not confirm that with complete certainty. So, just like that, the two most obvious suspects were eliminated, and detectives were nearly back where they had begun. From the evidence at the scene, police firmly believed the murderer had known Alice. To investigators, it appeared he had entered her home for one particular purpose: to sexually assault her. That suggested this did not seem like something that had occurred randomly. Instead, it appeared carefully planned. Detectives questioned Alice's relatives and friends about whether she had any enemies, but nobody could identify a single person who might have wanted to harm her. From everything they understood, Alice was friendly, compassionate, and easy to admire. Because she worked at the pharmacy, she was also widely recognized throughout town, and people respected her because she treated customers with the same kindness and patience she would have given someone within her own family. That prompted detectives to begin examining people who might have encountered Alice through her work. They considered whether the murderer could have been one of her colleagues, or perhaps even a customer. Since Alice worked with prescription medication, they also explored the possibility that someone battling addiction might have singled her out, carried some type of resentment, or something similar. However, the pharmacy staff were eliminated fairly quickly, and the theory that a customer might have been responsible led nowhere. Police also chose to investigate every male employee at the supermarket where the pharmacy was situated. More than 240 people worked there, so detectives needed considerable time to examine them all. Yet that direction ended in another dead end. Throughout the following several months, investigators uncovered almost nothing new, and it gradually began feeling as though the case was slipping beyond their reach. They continued interviewing Alice's neighbors and distributing flyers throughout the neighborhood, hoping someone might recall something valuable. At one stage, detectives discovered one of Alice's neighbors, living directly behind her house, had an earlier conviction for sexual assault. They investigated him immediately, but once again, that lead produced nothing. On the night Alice was murdered, the man had been in another state. By July 2003, 8 months after Alice was murdered, investigators were exhausting every remaining lead. So, they decided to begin again. They retrieved the case file again and reviewed it section by section, searching for anything that might have been overlooked the first time. When they arrived at the supermarket employee records and their alibis, one particular detail immediately stood out. There was a 24-year-old employee named Jeffrey who had reported for work the morning after the murder. However, according to his time card, he had remained only 15 minutes before leaving. Detectives went to interview a supervisor who explained that Jeffrey had arrived that day with a deep cut across his hand, and it was bleeding. Because Jeffrey's duties involved stocking merchandise, his supervisor could not allow him to continue working like that, so he sent him home. That instantly captured the detectives' attention. During the earliest weeks of the investigation, they had heard about an employee with an injured hand, but at that time, the supervisor had informed them the man's hand had already been bandaged for several days. Because of that, they had not considered him a genuine suspect. This time, however, the supervisor produced the medical note Jeffrey had provided that day, and it stated Jeffrey had visited a doctor for a cut on his hand early, during the morning of November 23rd, only hours after Alice was murdered. There was another detail detectives had never learned before. Remember the hairs recovered from Alice's body? Experts had said they most likely belonged to an African-American man. However, they had noticed something else as well. Some of those hairs were gray. Because of that, police had assumed the killer might have been older. But now, Jeffrey's supervisor informed them that although Jeffrey was only 24, he had a patch of gray hair on his head. Detectives immediately went to question Jeffrey. He told them he hardly knew Alice and had only noticed her around the store several times. Even so, he remembered her as someone compassionate, someone who treated people kindly. Then detectives examined his hand and noticed a scar. When they questioned how he had received the cut, Jeffrey explained he had been moving a kitchen cabinet and accidentally sliced his hand on one of its doors. Investigators immediately asked whether that cabinet remained at his house, and Jeffrey said it did. He even offered to show it to them, and detectives accepted the opportunity immediately. They understood they would not discover anything useful without proper laboratory testing, but that was not the purpose. Jeffrey had just welcomed them inside his home without requiring a warrant, and they could not ignore that opportunity. After entering, the detectives inspected the cabinet. Then one investigator asked whether he could look around the room, and Jeffrey granted permission. Meanwhile, the second detective asked Jeffrey to sit down so they could continue speaking. He seated Jeffrey with his back facing the middle of the room so he would not notice what the other detective was doing. Then he continued asking questions, hoping to keep him distracted. Both detectives understood that if Jeffrey suddenly asked them to leave, they would have no option except walking out. Therefore, they tried keeping him relaxed and making the conversation seem as ordinary as possible. Jeffrey began discussing how he attended church regularly and performed in the choir. At one point, he even offered to sing a church hymn for them. While one detective pretended to enjoy the performance, the other quietly walked toward a plain cardboard box and peeked inside. What he discovered was something even a seasoned detective had not expected. Inside the box rested a roll of tape with long blonde hairs attached to it, and that was merely the beginning. Beside the tape was a mask from the movie Scream. Upon it, the detective could plainly see dried red stains. He returned the box exactly where it had been and signaled his partner that it was time to finish up. The detectives told Jeffrey they wanted to continue talking at the station. They also offered to buy him lunch, and Jeffrey agreed to accompany them. However, while leaving, the detectives spotted one additional suspicious detail in the hallway. An old calendar from the previous year was hanging on the wall. When one officer checked the murder date, November 23rd, he noticed a note written beside it. "My love, what a day." Police asked Jeffrey what it meant, and he replied he had simply attended a great party that day. Afterward, they brought him to the station. While detectives kept Jeffrey occupied there, their fellow officers obtained a warrant to search his house. During that search, they seized the roll of tape and the Scream mask, and they also recovered a black cloak or cape. In addition, they uncovered women's underwear concealed inside the house. Meanwhile, back at the station, detectives gradually began steering the conversation toward Alice's murder. Eventually, they made it obvious they believed Jeffrey had been the person who killed her. Initially, however, he denied every allegation. Then they informed him about the Scream mask, explaining it was already being sent to the laboratory. That was the moment Jeffrey's account began changing rapidly. Only the revised version he offered was so unbelievable that detectives refused to believe any of it. According to Jeffrey, he had been outside that evening when two unfamiliar men suddenly began chasing him. He claimed that while escaping them, he smashed a window and climbed into Alice's house. From there, his account became even more unbelievable. Somehow, he insisted he accidentally ended up having sex with Alice before leaving, maintaining she was still alive when he walked away. To the detectives, it ranked among the most ridiculous stories they had ever heard throughout their years in law enforcement. They continued questioning him, and eventually Jeffrey started describing what had actually happened that night. According to Jeffrey, he and Alice had briefly spoken at work the day before the murder. Following that conversation, he began fantasizing about having sex with her. The following day, he drove to her house, put on the Scream mask and the cloak, shattered the downstairs window, and climbed inside. Next, he went upstairs and entered Alice's bedroom. When Alice noticed him, she screamed, and both of them immediately began struggling. During the confrontation, she managed to pull the mask from his face, and the instant she saw him, she recognized Jeffrey. He then decided he needed to kill her because she now knew who he was. He admitted he had not originally gone there intending to murder Alice. Detectives believed that part. The fact he had worn a mask indicated he had intended to conceal his identity. But once Alice recognized him, everything changed. Afterward, he tied her hands, taped her mouth, sexually assaulted her, and finally strangled her. After completing his confession, Jeffrey was arrested. Sometime afterward, the DNA findings confirmed what investigators had already suspected. The hair attached to the tape and the blood covering the Scream mask belonged to Alice. The blood discovered inside her house also matched Jeffrey's DNA. Yet that was not everything detectives uncovered. During the search of Jeffrey's residence, Police recovered videotapes revealing he had secretly filmed women working alongside him at the supermarket. Based on those recordings, he had not merely been watching them at work, he had also been following them beyond the store, recording them without their awareness. Later, every one of those women said they had absolutely no idea it was happening. In addition, several of Jeffrey's co-workers told investigators he had displayed a noticeable interest in Alice and appeared almost fixated on her. However, after the murder, none of them had considered connecting him to the crime. Part of the explanation may have been the age difference. Jeffrey was 43 years younger than Alice, so it simply may never have occurred to anyone that his interest in her might have been sexual. Alice's family was equally stunned when detectives revealed the killer's identity. None of them knew Jeffrey, and learning who he was came as a complete surprise. Alice's children admitted they had believed for a long time that Jack, their mother's second husband, had been responsible. They never expected the murderer would prove to be an obsessed co-worker from the pharmacy. Preparing the case for trial required about a year, and Jeffrey faced the possibility of receiving the death penalty. However, prosecutors eventually offered him a plea deal, partly to spare the family from enduring months or even years of lengthy court proceedings. Under that agreement, Jeffrey would admit his crimes before a judge, and in return, he would receive life imprisonment instead of a death sentence. Alice's family supported that agreement. None of them wanted to endure a trial, hear the details describing what had been done to their mother, or be forced to view the crime scene photographs. So, Jeffrey remains behind bars today. Under state law, he has absolutely no possibility of parole, meaning he will spend the remainder of his life in prison. Police also attempted to determine whether he might have been linked to any other unsolved murders, but that investigation produced nothing. Even so, it is difficult not to wonder what might have happened had he never been captured. Based on the circumstances surrounding Alice's murder, investigators believe Jeffrey may have possessed the potential to continue attacking women and possibly even become a serial killer. Thanks for watching Crime Chapter 51. If you enjoyed today's cases, let us know in the comments which one stayed with you the most, and tell us where you're watching from. If you love long-form true crime documentaries, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next case.